It's February 15th, yeah? 2026 here in Naperville. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nivasesa Nivadi Paskatyade Satarane Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Sam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Panchakalpachubhishcha Kripasindhyavicha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. Do you all have your handouts from yesterday? Woohoo! Okay. So I was just, today I was originally just going to talk about the community and relationship between the fields, but I thought we had so much interest yesterday and so many good questions that it would be really good to do this particular section of Career Dharma, which is what happens when you do somebody else's work? What happens when somebody goes into the wrong field? And when Rukmini and I were working on the book, the biggest question that we had over and over again was why? Why does the Lord take the hundreds of thousands of careers and put them into these four categories? What's the benefit of doing this? You know, why is Prabhupada so adamant so many times over and over again that people have to be in one of these four designations? And it became very clear to us when we looked at this problem. What happens when somebody with one temperament does work in a field that's not their temperament? And the more that we worked on this, the more we were like, oh my God, so many of the problems of the world, and dare I say our little microcosm of the world in the Hare Krishna movement, could be attributed to this problem. And I think many times we have the attitude that it doesn't matter. Just do whatever's needed, just pitch in and do it, which is fine in terms of we need someone to serve prasadam right now for the next 10 minutes. Or everybody should pitch in and clean the floor after the feast. Or, hey, we have a real emergency. Can you do this for 3 days? But as an ongoing practice, there's a huge effect both in terms of society and life and also in terms of our spiritual life. So this is really principle 4, interestingly enough, ethical and meaningful work of value, that it's actually impossible in the long term to have your work be ethical if you're doing somebody else's work. So when a teacher repeats something, it means that it's important. And there's only 2 verses that Krishna repeats twice in the Bhagavad Gita. One of them is this one. Swayansadama Viguna Paradamasanustitat, which you can see the same 2 lines are there in the 18th chapter. What's the other one? What's the other verse that Krishna repeats? Manmana Bhavamad Bhakto, which is in 9 and 18. So when a teacher repeats something, especially verbatim, it means it's very important. And when they repeat something in the summary, it means it's important. So Krishna's repeating this twice, and it's in the summary. Swayasodharmam Viguna Paradamastanustitat, which he says again in the 18th chapter. And of course, even though he's not repeating this exact verse more than 2 times, he's making this point over and over and over and over again. You know, when I first read the Bhagavad Gita, when I was in college, when I was 17, and Prabhupada would talk about prescribed duties, I was thinking, what's that? What are prescribed duties? What does that mean? So Krishna says, don't go into someone else's path, even if you think you can do it better. Does anyone remember the 3 areas of expertise in work? Yeah? And Dharma. So you might be very good at the information, the knowledge, and the skills of someone else's work. You might be very expert at it, but if it's not your Dharma, don't do it. That's pretending to be something that you're not, which is exhausting. It's exhausting. You ever been at a social gathering you didn't really want to be at? oh, I'm so happy to be here. You know, that's what it's like. And Krishna uses this word in the 3rd chapter verse, bhayavaha, that your work becomes a vehicle of fear. It's like if you're trying to, ride your bicycle in the sky or your car in the water, your vehicle becomes dangerous for you who's driving it and for everyone around you. Now, we mentioned this yesterday. This is on a personal level. Swadharma means our own work. Paradharma means someone else's work. When I'm doing my own work, I'm going to feel enlivened. This is true even if you're physically tired. Even if you literally physically need to stop and eat or rest, your work is so enlivening, you don't want to. It's with regret that you take a break. It's like, I love what I'm doing. When doing someone else's work, it's the opposite. You're depleted. You're always looking to take breaks. You can't wait till the day is over. When we're doing our own work, our mind is our friend. Remember we talked yesterday about the pejorative ways in which people who are not in a field see the other fields? And I was realizing that, like, if you don't have the temperament of ideas and you're doing ideas work, then your mind's going to be your enemy. The whole time you're working, you might be thinking, God, this work is useless. Why do I have to do this? If you don't have a government temperament and you're doing government work, you might think, why aren't the leaders doing this? Why do I have to do it? Why do I have to use so much heaviness and power and control? If you don't have a resources temperament, you're doing resources work, you might think, why am I dealing with money and profit? Yuck. I don't want to deal with that. If you don't have an artistry temperament, you're doing artistry work, like, why do I have to please these people? Why do I have to make these customers happy? Or you might be thinking, does anybody care what I'm doing? Like, nobody cares. Why am I even doing it? Nobody's appreciating it. Or some variety of that. But in some way, you're going to be battling your mind. Because your natural internal temperament is at odds with what you're doing. And when we're doing work that's our own work, the work itself is very satisfying. So like Prabhupada says, to live life with a thrill at every moment. So at each moment, you're offering your work to Krishna. The ultimate success or failure, success, failure, win, lose, fame, infamy, honor, dishonor, is not so important. Because you're getting that satisfaction from that minute-by-minute connection with Krishna. When you're doing someone else's work, it's very hard to do that. It's possible, but it's extremely difficult. And so one tends to get attached to the results. One tends to get attached, well, at least I make enough money. Or at least with this job, I have enough time to do service at the temple and do good sadhana. Or at least with this job, I don't have a long commute. One tends to get attached to that result. And it's much more difficult to offer the work to Krishna. Now you might say, well, this is all on the personal level. It's just hurting me if I do the wrong work. But imagine, you go into a workplace or a community and everybody's doing the work according to their nature. So everyone's enlivened, their mind is their friend, and they're detached from the results. Would you pick that up? Would that affect you walking into that environment? Or conversely, you go into an environment where everyone's depleted, where they're all fighting with their mind the whole time, and where they're all attached to the fruits of their work. Would that affect you? So it's not just about ourselves. All right, now we're going to look at the level of the greater society. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We have an entire chapter of the book dedicated to this, to every possible wrong combination. A government temperament person working in artistry, government temperament person in resources, government temperament person in ideas, and so forth. Every possible wrong combination. And with each case, we back it up with several historical examples. And my co-author, Dr. Ruchira Datta, was adamant they have to be completed examples. They can't be like something that we're in the middle of right now. So we give many more instances of the problems, and we give specific historical examples. That's chapter 6 or 7, I believe. So we have one general chapter on the problems with crossing between fields, and what to do if if you realize, gosh, I'm working in the wrong field. How to switch. And then we have one chapter on the specific crossings. So I'm just going to be touching on some of the major things. I'm not going to be looking at everything. Thank you. Okay, so first we're going to look at crossing government and resources. So you're welcome to look at your handy dandy little handouts there and tell me anything that's similar about government and resources. Any similarities? Yes, Prabhu. Excellent. They're both diplomatic and expansive. Can anyone tell me anything that's different about them? What's different about government and resources? Excellent. Excellent. The government is more generous. If there's a crisis, they give everything away. Resources can never do that because then there won't be any food next season, right? Government is also serving people directly in kind of a parental role. And resources, they pretend that they are, but they're not. It's an unsentimental field. It's an unsentimental field. Their priority is to keep the business going for the sake of the customers and for the sake of the employees, but their focus is on the business. All right. Also, there's a difference in concreteness and abstractness. Government is more abstract. It's broader. Okay, let's look at resource temperament people doing government work. Resource temperament people doing government work. So here we have the concrete abstract problem. The focus of resources people is more narrow. It's more narrow. So they're looking at their particular industry, they're in the garment industry, they're looking at their competitors, they're looking at fashion trends, they're just related to their industry. And government has to look at everything. And so when resource-minded people go into government, it's very difficult for them to have a broad picture. It's very difficult for them to have a broad picture. I was watching a video the other day of this person who was an advisor, an intelligence advisor to a whole group of different United States presidents. And this person mentioned that most of the presidents, all but one, that she was an advisor to, would look at things politically and economically. They would have questions about the intelligence briefing that related to socioeconomic factors, political, economic, social factors. But one particular president that she was an advisor to only looked at economic factors, only looked at things that had to do with business and resources. They weren't able to look at the whole picture. And I'm not naming names, and you can figure it out if you want. Resource-minded people working in government, they may try to make a profit off of government. They may try to make a profit off of government. You have to make a profit when you're in resources, or else it's not sustainable and regenerative. That's the dharma of resources. You bring that into government, it becomes a corruption. In the United States, we have some privately run prisons that are run as businesses. And they're not interested in rehabilitation of the prisoners. In fact, they want repeat customers. And so it's not done with the mood of protection. Protection of the prisoners, protection of the people, because that's not their mentality. Okay, government temperament people in resources. Now you might think, well, they put people over projects. That's great. Those resources people, they put projects over people. Oh, but you go into business and then you're going to prioritize taking care of the people and your business fails. Right? Government-minded people and resources, their focus is on justice. And when they're going to decide what's a fair price, they're going to decide what's a fair price based on social justice. Not what's a fair price based on, again, the sustainability and regeneratability of the business. And again, the business is likely to fail. We had several examples of government-minded people who started a business for the sake of social justice, and either those businesses failed or they ended up selling them to resources people. Right? Government temperament people are going to tend to define a fair price in a way that will lead to the failure of the enterprise. Are any of you familiar with what happened in the former Soviet Union when the government took over the farms? The first or second time I ever taught this was to a group of Russians. And they all said with one voice, famine. The produce was literally rotting in the fields. Because they didn't have that, what do we say people and resources are? Always what? Thirsty. They're always thirsty. They didn't have this thirst for feeding the world. And so the businesses failed. Okay, crossing government and ideas. Anything similar about government and ideas? This is a little bit harder. No, that extreme detachment is only there in ideas. It's the hallmark of ideas. In fact, this detachment problem is one of our problems. High level, yes? They're both high-level systems thinking. So ideas is looking more abstractly at systems and looking at systems to understand them. Government is looking at systems to control them, and they don't usually go up to the same level of abstractions, but they're both big systems thinkers. Yes? Yeah, well, that's the difference, that there's more mercy in ideas, and we're going to see in a minute why that's important. What's some other differences between government and ideas temperament? Yes? Oh, all dharmic people in all four fields are selfless. See, what happens is, again, because we have one of these fields is our dharma, we have to. We have our gut reaction to the other three fields is that they're selfish and adharmic. It just is what it is. You know, the only way to go above that is to kind of go to a general philosophical viewpoint. When I teach people how to coach, how to help people understand their field, one of the main things that people have to do, because we try to build scenarios for people to see what they want to walk into, is I say, you've got to build this scenario for each of the four fields with enthusiasm as if it was your field. I said, you got to be like a realtor selling a house that you don't want to live in. But you can't say, it's got a small yard. That you've got to be able to kind of at least temporarily take yourself to the other person's point of view. But our innate feeling is that the dharma of the other fields, because it's a dharma field. Yeah. Okay, so ideas temperament people in government, too merciful. Too merciful. They'll be soft on crime. Do we have this problem in our Hare Krishna movement? Yes, we do. Their interest is not so much in justice. And they'll be thinking, how can we take care of this poor criminal and help him out and let's give him a 15th chance. I've actually run into this, Oh yeah, he assaulted people in another 10 temples in North America. Oh, well, let's give him another chance here. I was like, And of course, then he did it again. Oh, give him another chance. Ideas people in government, they're too detached. They're too detached. In government, you've got to be a little bit rah, our team. Our country, our group is the best. You've got to do that because that's how you get people to pay their taxes and sign up for military service and work for the country. You get this enthusiasm of patriotism, the holidays about your country. There's something funny about that. Do you know what the most celebrated holiday in the world is? Independence from the UK. Every 6 days, some country celebrates its independence from the UK. Sorry, any of you Brits here. Sorry about that. Or any of you Brits listening to this. Sorry about that. But anyway, there's these patriotic days, This is about our country and our history, and that's necessary. And the government people, they bring out, it's pomp and circumstance, and right? And ideas people are like, our country? Your country? What is this? It's all artificial constructs. Ideas temperament people working in government. So they like to research, and they like to research some more, and research some more, and research some more, and then a little bit more. And maybe we should look into this a little further, and a little further, and a little further. And I will tap, but I don't have time right now. And a little further. But in government, you often have to make decisions for the benefit of the people right now. You can't necessarily spend 20 years researching something that people need. You have to be able to make decisions without all the possible information. It's a little bit more concrete field. And so if ideas people are in government, they're not going to take the decisive action. They'll say, but what about this permutation? What about this thing? This is a new slide. This is only the second time I'm showing this slide. I found. I thought this is really epitomized this problem. Okay. Then we have government-minded people and ideas. Now, government-minded people will tend to politicize knowledge. Like, would you trust a history book written by a government person? No. Now, by the way, the other three fields besides ideas will all tend to pollute ideas in some way. So government people will politicize it, resources people will profitize it, artistry people will centralize it. And in all three cases, people will lose trust in the objectivity of what comes out of the field of ideas, which is catastrophic for society. If you can't, I field of ideas like the eyes of the society. If you can't trust what you're seeing, you're not going to have any direction in life. So it pollutes the whole field of ideas, that people think we can't trust it. This is a problem today, isn't it? Again, it's a problem on a macro scale. It's a problem on a micro scale. Government temperament people and ideas. This is your concrete abstract problem. Government people are comfortable with a lot more hierarchy than in ideas. If you think about like the military, ideas people are not like this. And I guess that what was most obvious to me was right after I got my PhD, I went to my thesis advisor, who was also my academic advisor and one of my professors. And I said, thank you so much, Dr. English, for all your help. And he looked at me and said, no, no, no. He said, I'm not Dr. English anymore. He said, you're one of us now. I'm Fenwick. And I see this lack of hierarchy around, if ideas people are just with ideas people, then it's like this level playing field. They're not so much into status and hierarchy. But if a government tempered person goes into ideas, they're going to tend to impose a hierarchy, which impedes the free flow of knowledge. Government temperament people working in ideas, here we have the detachment problem. They're going to bring the patriotism thing into ideas. This brings sectarianism into religion and religious wars. It belongs in government, but it doesn't belong in ideas. And they're going to have a very difficult time having this detachment. Okay, ideas and resources, crossing ideas and resources. What's similar? If you look at your handout, you might be able to find something that is similar. Yes. That's something we haven't taught here, which is the prosperity types. You can have an individual who's really into knowledge in any of the four fields. So that's gaining knowledge is not field specific. Everybody should be ethical if they're dharmic. Yes, I'm looking for a similarity, though. Yeah, this is hard. This is a very hard question. They're both unsentimental fields. See, artistry and government are serving people directly, albeit differently, but resources and ideas are both very unsentimental fields. No, resources people are not detached. The detachment you find only in ideas. Okay, in what ways are they different? Don't ideas people care about people? Well, that's a criticism of those outside of the field of ideas. People who are not in the field of ideas say you're so detached you don't care about anybody. You're just up in your own cloud somewhere. I like to say diplomacy rather than dishonesty. Although Prabhupada uses the word lying, Srila Prabhupada does say lying is compulsory in the field of resources and often in the field of government. He does say that in the 18th chapter. I personally prefer not to use the word lying because I think it has such a pejorative, that people are going to take that resources and government people are intrinsically unethical. But it's a different system of ethics. So diplomacy and honesty, yes. And another difference, yes? Oh, see, that's again pejorative. See, actually, no one in any field if they're dharmic. You do have this distinction between a natural inclination for a field and dharmic expertise in a field. So you might have a resource person who has an inclination for expansive wealth that hasn't been trained in the Dharma and therefore becomes selfish and greedy. But that can happen to an ideas person too who's not trained in the Dharma. Yes? So everybody has to be trained in their Dharma, but a dharmic resource person wants to generate money for the world. They want to make the world wealthy. In order to do that, they have to bring wealth through themselves. Like I can't make the world knowledgeable if I don't bring knowledge to myself. Like, right? So I can't make the world wealthy if I'm not channeling wealth through myself. But no, Dharma is always outward facing. It's service. People doing these fields properly, their mood is one of service. So you're never going to find a distinction between the fields themselves in terms of selfishness or in terms of corruption. I mean, why did Prabhupada want us to teach this and establish it? If the four fields always exist and people with the temperaments of the four fields always exist, why do we have to do anything? Well, first of all, people need, as Prabhupada said in the fourth canto, they need to be trained in the Dharma of their field, just as much as you need to be trained in the skills of your field. Does that make sense to everybody? Like one of my grandsons, now I think he plays the what does he play? The cello. But before he was playing the saxophone or the trumpet, one of those brass instruments. And I went to visit them, I think in 2021 when COVID was still going on. And so the music teacher had to come to the house because they weren't having full classes at school. So he was a beginning saxophone, I can't remember saxophone or trumpet, beginning saxophone player. And my son and daughter-in-law said, Mata, while he's having the lesson, you should probably go in your room and close the door. So the fact that a person has musical talent doesn't mean they initially have musical skills. Does this make sense to everybody? Again, unless you're like Mozart, you still have to be trained in the skills. You can have a natural tendency to be a dancer, but you still have to take dance lessons. So you can have an inclination. You can have an inclination toward a particular dharma. We all do. But you still have to be trained in that dharma. Does that make sense? Clear? Okay. So when people are corrupt, they're in the wrong field. So they're bringing the dharma into the wrong place. Or they're in the right field, but they haven't been trained in the dharma. They're violating some of the other principles. Is this clear? This is really important. It's really, really, really important. We tend to see prejudicially something that's not like, wow, how can you eat that? Oh my God, I can't believe you eat it. You know, this is our yeah, okay. So differences between resources and ideas. Okay, that's interesting. Yes, because resource is the only one who's actually generating wealth. Any other differences? You can look at your papers. Well, yeah, then you're looking at the concrete abstract situation. I think that all of the fields are results oriented in some sense, but the type of result is very different. So the results and ideas are much more abstract. The processes are more abstract, the results are more abstract. Yes, excellent. You have a satisfaction and expansion difference. And another one? You're looking at that one. Okay. All right. This particular crossing especially fascinates me. I find this especially fascinating. So ideas, temperament, people working in resources are going to feel that making money and making a profit is unethical. I had personal experience of this. One of my god sisters was running a business in like hand creams and cosmetics in a mall. And one of her main salespeople had just quit. And so she asked me to help her out. And because I love her very much, she's been a very dear friend of mine for a long time, I agreed to help her. I hated it. And what I hated was I hated selling things. And I hated that I was making money off of people. That was what I hated the most. I was being paid by commission. So I'm selling people like a $12 bottle of hand lotion. And I'm thinking, it's probably only worth 50 cents. And, you know, I basically felt like I was cheating people. I constantly felt like I was cheating people. You know, but unless we charged $12, we couldn't pay for the kiosk in the mall. We could, you know, nobody was being cheated. But I felt like that. I felt like making money is unethical. One of my good friends who has an idea temperament and started a business, she said, I hate running a business. She said, I hate making money. I wish I could just give everything away. You know, ideas, people, and resources, they're not expansive. They're not expansive. They're happy to grow a garden, but they don't want to feed the world. They have a really hard time with getting that energy. You know, the resource person, they're always thirsty. And the ideas person, they're satisfied. And they're like, why should I work so hard? Remember I was talking to you about my youngest son where he was saying how he was making more money working 3 days a week for his own business than when he worked for someone else 5 days a week. And I'm like, great. You got an extra 2 days. You got 4 days off a week. I said, you could write a book. And he, you know, he looked at me like I was mad. He's just like, why would I do that? I'll work 5 days a week and make even more money. So, you know, an ideas person going into resources, they'll be like, if I can just make enough to pay my bills in 2-3 days a week, that's fine. But then they won't feed the world. They won't clothe the world. They will become selfish. You understand? An ideas person working in resources, they will become selfish and think just how can I make money for myself? They won't be thinking of how to expand wealth for the world because that's not their interest. Or they'll just be miserable. People with a temperament of resources going into ideas, they will profitize knowledge. Think about pharmaceutical companies who do pharmaceutical research. Do you trust it? No, it's the same thing, and it damages the whole field of ideas. Now I always have to explain this slide when I'm out of America. But to resources people, they think the abstract nature of the field of ideas is like a pie in the sky. Right? Prabhupada would say like a horse's egg or a rabbit's horn. It doesn't have any meaning. Now this is what really interests me, that for a resource person to spend time and human energy on theoretical abstract research is unethical. They actually see it as unethical. So the ideas person sees making a profit is unethical. And the resource person thinks, why are we wasting human hours and money on research that's not going to generate money? That's unethical. It's an unethical use of resources. I was like, wow. It's a different system. Each one is seeing the other one as unethical. And this was just, as one of my adult granddaughters would say, a mind blow. I mean, it just never occurred to me that people would see a lot of the work I do as unethical. It was just like, wow. Oh. I actually ran into this problem when I was trying to produce our curriculum for children, Learn to Read. I don't know if any of you have seen that. And we're getting it reprinted now. I'm really happy about that. But when I was first working on it, I was looking for a temple that would take care of me so I could do this. And to me, this was very practical. I'm trying to produce curriculum for our children internationally. I wasn't just doing a study on Kavi Karnapur's poetry, you know. And so I was saying, can you give me a room to stay in and, you know, give you some kitchery and a place to sleep and a place to work? And Evanston, they said, we can give you a shared office with 10 people. And London said, you can stay for 3 months. And only Auckland, New Zealand said, sure. And the only reason they did that is I was good friends with the head of the school, who was good friends with the temple president. And they said, okay, we'll give you a space and we'll give you a place to work, and we'll make no local demands of service on you at all. I mean, I gave like 1 class a week at the temple, 1 class a week in town, but they said, we won't ask you to do anything for the local temple. So that's very unusual, because most temples are looking at that and saying, that's unethical. It's unethical to give you a room in kitchery if all you're doing is writing curriculum. What use is that? You know, we need a pujari, we need this, we need that. Okay, crossing ideas and artistry. So what is similar about these? Satisfaction, although a different kind of satisfaction, and honesty. Satisfaction, honesty. What's different? Well, be a little bit more specific. Okay, the detachment, yes, and people in artistry, what they're satisfied with is creature comforts. Yes? Also, what's different? Yes? Yes, we have the abstract. This is the biggest spread of difference between abstract and concrete. This is the biggest difference between abstract. This is the most abstract field and the most concrete field. Okay? And we also have the detachment is directly opposed to the desire to please customers and clients. What are you detached from in ideas? You're detached from trying to please people. You're unsentimental. I'm going to give you what's good for you. I'm going to tell you you have cancer and you have to stop smoking. Right? Although you don't want to hear that. Do you follow? Yeah? All right. Artistry temperament people working in ideas. So here we have a concrete abstract problem. And I see this quite a bit when artistry temperament people try to do ideas work, they miss subtleties. The abstractions of ideas, it doesn't interest them. They don't pick up on it. They might pick up the subtleties of different wood grains. You know, I know some carpenters who they can just look at wood and tell you, okay, I can tell you what kind of wood this is and how it was finished. And so they're looking at that nuance. And in our Hare Krishna movement, we find people who have an artistry temperament, when they try to talk about philosophical things, they'll often they'll look for black and white understandings. Like you're trying to make some kind of understanding and policy, and they'll say, well, there's this quote. And you say, well, yeah, there's this quote, but then there's also this quote, and there's this quote, and no, but there's this quote. Yeah. But there's also this quote, but there's this quote. And the interest in understanding, they're just not interested. They just make it simple, like it's just like this. And so that it's going to be hard for them to do the work. Now here we have artistry temperament people working in ideas. Their business is providing the pleasures of society. You don't want a society without pleasures. I talked about that would be like having rice without any salt or spices. It's just, right? When you make plain rice, you put something on it, right? You put dal on it or sabji or something. Curry sauce. Ideas are the eyes of society. metaphorically speaking, and artistry, metaphorically speaking, is providing the spices and salt of society. You don't want to put salt and spices in your eyes. They're going to tend to sensualize knowledge, which again pollutes the field of ideas. Right? I'm sure you know about different groups that, like, yoga is just for sex. You follow? They're going to sensualize knowledge. Okay, here we have the concrete abstract problem that artistry people are going to see not just as like pie in the sky or unethical, but useless. They're really going to see it as useless. They're going to see ideas work like crossword puzzles. Why do we have to do it? It's going to be very difficult for them to do that kind of work because what's the value of doing it? They're not going to have enthusiasm. And artistry-minded people, they want to please customers and clients. They're going to have a real conflict with trying to find objective truth that people might not like to hear. They're really going to have an inner struggle with this. And because of that, they're very prone to being corrupted. Because if someone comes along and says, hey, I'll offer you a nice place to stay and food to eat and a comfortable living situation and you can make me happy, just change your data a little bit. They're going to have a tendency to do that, whereas see the detachment of ideas, they're going to say, I don't care. Now, artistry people also, they're providing the foundation of society. They're maintaining the status quo. Ideas people are often challenging the status quo. It's going to be hard for artistry temperament people to do that. It goes against their essential nature of like providing that foundation of society. Now, what about ideas temperament people in artistry? This is the same problem for government temperament people in artistry. They don't want to please customers and clients. And this may show up in some cases as insubordination. It may show up as procrastination, failure to meet deadlines. They really don't want to be, okay, you do what I say and you have to please me and you have to, and I don't want to do it that way. Oh my God, I just thought of something. Oh my God, this is so embarrassing. So the first time when I was 17 and I first stayed for 2 weeks in the temple in Evanston, without my parents knowing about it, by the way. And so the devotees asked me to make garlands. This was before Kishore were installed. They had small Jagannath deities. They asked me to make garlands. And so I was making this garland, and then they said, oh, it's supposed to be symmetrical. And I said, but I don't want to make it symmetrical. So we have again the concrete abstract problem that people who are in ideas, there's very high integrity and honesty in both fields, but it's a different type. The ideas people, they want to have the honesty of objective truth, not the honesty of what's wrong with your bicycle. Right? They don't have the intellectual freedom. They might have creative freedom, but they don't have the intellectual freedom that they need. They may feel very constrained. Now, sometimes when ideas people go into artistry, sometimes, for some of them, not all, but their detachment may dry up the field of artistry because they're going to look at the nature of the field to provide the pleasures of society and say, this is all nonsense. This is all Maya. I have one friend who has an ideas temperament and he does artistry work. He works as an electrician. And I keep saying, get into your own field. And one time he said, Urmila, you're right. I'm in the wrong field. He said, the other electricians, they make the wires beautiful in the boxes that nobody can see. And I think, why are you bothering with this? Conversely, an ideas temperament person can get drawn into the sensuality of the field. Now, see, that's the natural place for artistry people. And if they're dharmic, they know how to bring people inspiring sensory pleasures, uplifting sensory pleasures. Gardens and artwork and drama that's going to uplift people because that's their natural place. However, if an ideas person who naturally is detached gets pulled into the sensual nature of artistry, they can end up becoming deeply corrupted. And especially if they are intellectuals, they can become like mad scientists, like making atomic bombs. We give the example of food scientists who study what makes us eat. There's a certain combination of sugar, sweetness, saltiness, fat, and crunch that biologically signals us, get a lot of this food. There's not a lot of that kind of food in nature. It doesn't exist in nature. So they engineer food. You know, a lot of the food today is engineered. It's not natural food. They engineer food like that to trigger that so that you'll keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eating. Just by the way, if we look at field crossing in general, what we're going to tend to do is we're going to tend to try to morph that field into our temperament if we can. We're going to try to take that field and make it fit us. So we'll distort the dharma of that field. Or we'll just be miserable. Or we'll get pulled into the dharma of that field that we can't manage. We don't know how to manage it. We don't know how to deal with it. And so we become corrupted and we corrupt the field. So that's basically the three options that can happen when a person goes into the wrong field. So this is one example. Here we have the example that the person is bringing their detachment into artistry and corrupting artistry in that way. And here we have the example that they're taking up the dharma of artistry, but because it's not their natural place, they become corrupted by it. Crossing government and artistry. What's similar? Not necessarily. Excellent. Focused on people. But very differently. Artistry as an assistant and government as a parent. So I always give the example, you go to a restaurant and you say, I want some ice cream for dessert. They bring you ice cream. They don't say, did you finish your broccoli? And don't you need to lose a little bit of weight there? Whereas the parent, if the child says, I want ice cream, they'll say, you eat your broccoli. Okay? So they're both serving people directly, but in a very different mood. Okay? So what's different about government and artistry? Yes, you have the expansive, satisfied. Another difference. Justice and fairness, yes. Diplomacy versus honesty, yes. And you have a concrete abstract problem. Okay, so artistry, temperament, people working in government, this is a concrete abstract problem. And I think I brought this up yesterday, that this is called the fog of war. That, in government, you make your strategies, what you're going to do when you hit the battlefield. But when you actually hit the battlefield, you have to make quick decisions without all information. This is going to be very hard for artistry people. They're very concrete. I want to know, do I do this, and I do this, and I do this like this, and I do this like this. And it's going to be very difficult for them to make decisions in an abstract environment. Here you have the expansive, satisfied problem. So artistry people want to serve people, but they don't want to serve big people. And they're going to say, well, that's a bunch of politics. I don't want to do a bunch of politics. This is also the diplomacy, honesty problem. I don't want to do it on a big scale in a diplomatic way. I want to serve people in an honest way, on a one-on-one. Artistry people in government, this is a concrete abstract problem. Government people have to work with principles. Artistry people much more want to work with rules. Now, you need some bureaucrats assisting in government, but you don't want government run like a bureaucracy. If people with an artistic temperament work in government, they'll turn government into a bureaucracy. Now, here you have the essential nature of government. Does anyone remember what the essential nature of government is that only exists in government? Yeah? Yes, they're energized by crisis. They're energized by crisis. And people in artistry are security people. They're maintainers of the status quo. They want comfort and security in life. But we had this a couple years ago in America. There was a school shooting, and the security officers or police officers, remember, they didn't run in the building? And when they said, why didn't you run in the building? They're like, well, people were shooting. Right? You all remember that? I think they're now being taken to court. So this is a big problem when artistry people go into government. These are the people who, you know, they're much more likely to get PTSD. Government temperament people in artistry. Well, you really don't want people who are energized by crisis doing your electrical wiring. And here we have the same problem as ideas in artistry, that they don't like pleasing customers and clients. I mean, parents serve their children, but they don't want their children telling them what to do. Right? It's a different dynamic. And so again, they may end up being insubordinate, they may miss deadlines, they may procrastinate, they have a very difficult time trying to please customers and clients. Also, very interesting phenomena that I see quite a bit, that when government-minded people work in artistry, this seems to be the most constricting place for them in terms of working for justice and protection. They seem to have the least ability in artistry jobs to protect people. And so they get very frustrated. Some of these people become vigilantes or they become agitators. My personal conviction is that at least some of the people who are spending an inordinate amount of time agitating for justice and morals and ethics are frustrated government people. You know, they're on the internet all the time and what about this justice? What about this fairness? What about this morals? What about this? What about this? Huh? No, and just in general, just people, you know, every other post they have is about some justice issue and they're always yelling and screaming about it. And we have this problem in our society as well because they don't have any outlet for it. They don't have any place to work for justice. And so they end up just causing, I mean, some people cause trouble for other reasons, but this is definitely one reason, is people who have a government mentality, but they're working in an artistry field. Okay, crossing resources and artistry. Resources and artistry. Anything similar about these two fields? Yeah, they're both kind of dealing with the practical side of life, right? There's still some difference between concrete and abstraction, but they're pretty close in terms of concrete and abstract. Yes. Yes. So resources is into profit. They're expansive and artistry is satisfied. And also difference, honesty and diplomacy. Yes. Okay. By the way, this particular crossing I see as a major problem in our modern society. Resources-minded people in artistry, they destroy the craft. Basically just destroy the field. They're too expansive. They go in to be a potter. Why should you make pots like this? You know, I can make pots in a factory. I can expand it. And you know, yeah, so then you have all the automation, all the factory, the automation, fast food, fashion that goes out of fashion after 2 months. Right? Mm-hmm. Let's not do that. I don't want to do that. Like in our book, we only use completed historical examples, not things that were in progress. Having entertainment that instead of being uplifting, right, is just trying to make a lot of money. They throw a lot of sex and violence in it just so they can make a lot of money. Drug-fueled sports. They're bringing that natural expansiveness into a place that it doesn't belong. And it becomes corrupt. All of these they're all corruptions. They're all corruptions, which is why you can't ethically work in someone else's field. You'll corrupt it in some way, or at least you'll become corrupt. Artistry, temperament, people, and resources, they're not expansive. They'll have a bakery, a little bakery, but they're not going to feed the world. They just don't have the inclination for it. They're not going to look at the whole markets and everything. And they're not going to have the sustainable, regenerative viewpoint. So if they go into business, they may become polluters. They're not thinking of how are we going to keep this business sustainable and regenerative. They may be thinking, okay, well, how can I make money today? Never mind what's happening in the long run. So I hope you see that for each of these fields, that everyone's glorious in their own place. Everyone's glorious in their own place. So I do want to go on to community relations, but I wanted, if there's any questions or discussions about crossing fields. Yes. And your question is? Well, Srila Prabhupada, correct me if I'm wrong, but he spent a lot of space in his books and a lot of time in his lectures talking about the importance of establishing this. Would you agree? Of establishing this. Would you agree? Everybody agree? Okay. A lot, quite a lot. It wasn't inconsequential. Like if you talk about, anamoya, pranamoya, manamoya, it's in one purport and one lecture. For reasons that are incomprehensible to me, it's also on some Bhakti Shastri exams. Trivia test. So, but with this topic, it wasn't like that. With this topic, this wasn't like one purport and one lecture. It's everywhere. So, first of all, we need to understand it. I think we've really misunderstood this topic. And then second of all, to look at, okay, let's try to put people in the right place and train them to be in that place. Train them not just in the knowledge and skills, but train them in the Dharma. And as I said yesterday, there's a lot of places where you can learn the knowledge and skills of work. There's hundreds of thousands of places where you can go to learn the knowledge and skills of how to be a business person or how to be a teacher. But there's no one training in the Dharma. I mean, Rukmini and I looked, could be we missed something, but we couldn't find anywhere. We found places that sort of pretended to do it. We found some books that sounded, oh, wow, somebody's doing this. And then it would be all about astrology or something. So there's a real need for this, to get people in the right place and then train them in that Dharma. Any other questions about crossing fields? Yes. Oh, I'm going to stop you right there before you say anything more. Go on the database, do a search for that phrase, do the needful. You will never find one instance ever where Srila Prabhupada used that phrase, which is a typical Indian idiom, by the way. It's a typical Indian idiom to mean do what's needed to be done, whether or not it's your nature. Not once ever. Well, isn't that sad? Srila Prabhupada used that phrase, do the needful, so I've sent Mr. Patel's check to the post office. Please pick it up and do the needful. That's how he used it. In other words, here's a general instruction. You take care of the details and do what's needed to be done to fill in the details. Never, ever, ever did he use this, ever, once, to mean do something that's not your nature. Never. Prabhupada said one of the jobs of the spiritual master is to understand your temperament and to engage you accordingly. There's one place where Prabhupada said you should engage people in doing what they like to do. Otherwise, they'll be unhappy and they'll leave. Go right ahead.
You have simple communities that are already, you have artistic people doing this, business people doing that, and there's a complete
mess.
So now, how do you want to come back to square one and start to reorganize the community?
I'm trying.
But how
Well, that's the second part of today's seminar. Is how are you going to do this? And that's on the back of the paper that has the arrow at the top. It's on the back of that paper, and that's what we'll be discussing in a few minutes. It's not easy. It would be easiest to do this in a new community that's just starting. It's not so easy to do it in an established community because people have become attached to being in the wrong place. That's where they get their money. That's where they get their status and so forth. And even though they're unhappy. So for many years, I was doing some service as what they call a doula, although I didn't know it was called that at the time. And I helped deliver about 50 babies. And one thing that often happens to women in labor is they're not making progress because they're in a funny position. And the midwife or the doctor will say, it would help if you shift your position. I'm not shifting my position. So, well, then the baby's going to take a long time to be born. And you might have complications. I'm not moving. Eventually, usually you get them to move. Eventually, they want the baby to be born badly enough that they'll move. So I think it's like that. Are we going to, if we could see the benefits of this, if we could see the benefits, we'll want it enough that we'll move, that we'll shift. First of all, we'd get a benefit of pleasing Prabhupada. But that perhaps that's an overworked admonition. Let's please Prabhupada. Yeah, okay. How many more things do I have to do to please Srila Prabhupada? So I'm not sure how much. Like donor fatigue, we're kind of, so some of these things were a little, I'm not sure. Let's do what Krishna wants. It's a long list. So I'm not sure how much I can do that. Please, Prabhupada, do what Krishna wants. Sure, yes, ma'am. Okay. But if we see, like Prabhupada Swami keeps emphasizing that if we don't have a culture of respect, it's going to impact our advancement. It's going to impact our sadhana. It's going to impact what we really want. And what I see is that when people are in the wrong place, it's so much harder to make spiritual advancement. It's like, why do you want to walk up a vertical glass mountain when you could just glide, Why make spiritual life harder? So it makes you, when you're in the right place, your spiritual life is so much easier. Your ability to see the connection with Krishna is so much easier. You can see your work as service. You don't just see the money you're giving as service. I mean, one time when I was teaching this, there was one man in the audience, there was a GBC man there. There was one man in the audience that asked, how can my work be service? And the GBC man said, well, it can't be. So the only way it can be service is if you give the money to me, kind of thing, So. And that's awful. I mean, that's awful. Wouldn't it be nice if while you're working to maintain yourself, you're seeing how your work is service to Krishna? That you lose this distinction between the material and the spiritual. In our Krishna Meditations book, we have a lot about that, how to see the world as spiritual. And we have so many nice quotes from Prabhupada, from the Acharyas, from the Shastras, about how material and spiritual is a matter of consciousness. But it's also a matter of being in the right place. If you're a lung cell, it's going to be hard to serve the body if you're floating around in the stomach. That, I don't know, maybe you could do it, but it's going to be difficult. Right? You got to get in the lung if you want to serve the body. So if I really want to serve Krishna by my work, I have to be in the right place. Then if we're going to bring this to the world, then we sound, to me, it sounds like we're in a different religion. Suffer in this life, and when you die, you will go to heaven. Whereas Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 3:10, he said, I've made this system of yajna for, anybody know that verse? For what? living happily and attaining liberation. He said, I've given the system of yajna for living happily and attaining liberation. You know, dukalayam shashvatam is only if you're in the wrong consciousness. If you're in the right consciousness, you see, Prabhupada, there's one class where Prabhupada says 3 times, then there's no material world, there's no material world, there's no material world. Wouldn't it be nice if we could live the Bhagavad Gita? As I said yesterday, I think that many of us are stuck in Arjuna's perspective in the first 6, 7 chapters. My work is all Maya. My work is a problem. I need to give up my work and do Buddha yoga. Why are you asking me to do this work? We're stuck there. And we're not in Krishna's perspective. Wait a minute. The work that's according to your nature, and he says in the 18th chapter, work done according to your nature is not affected by sinful reaction. Prabhupada talks about it as being transcendental. He said Arjuna's shooting arrows were transcendental. Do we tell people giving people car loans is transcendental? But it is. How? So you asked, did you ask or somebody asked? Somebody asked me, how are each of the fields facilitating bhakti? Who asked me that? You asked me that. Okay, so Prabhupada talks about in the 3rd canto how artistry is close to bhakti because it's the only field that has this mood of service. The only field that has the mood of service. The others don't have it, and they can't have it. If they have it, it's a problem, actually. But, you know, you're painting a picture that goes in somebody else's house. Your pleasure is their pleasure. That's right next to bhakti. My pleasure is Krishna's pleasure. To segue from my pleasure is the customer's pleasure to my pleasure is Krishna's pleasure is very easy. Now, the other fields can have a mood of service to Krishna, but it's so easy for the artistry person to do that. By the way, the services in the Hare Krishna movement that we praise the most are generally artistry services. We're really happy with the person who just, you know, takes care of the electricity and the plumbing and cleans things and does whatever needs to be done, right? Especially if they're not married and they're just full on for the temple. You know. Am I correct? All right. And what brings resources? What are they working with? And what do we call money in the Hare Krishna movement? Lakshmi. They're working with Mother Bhumi. Did a lot of you see that in the Singadev movie? Didn't you love that Bhumi? Wasn't she lovely? I just love it. That was my favorite part. Varaha's smelling where the earth is, right? Picking her up. They're serving Bhumi Devi. They're serving Lakshmi Devi. And we say all the time, if you want to please Krishna, first you have to please who? Radharani. They're serving the wife of God. Krishna likes that work so much he does it himself. Yeah. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I'm a Brahmin in this life because in my last life I protected cows. Right to the astrologer? Very funny story. And what about those in government? How were they most close to Bhakti? Yeah, and that's what Krishna does. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya jaduskritam. They're directly doing the work of God in the world. Generally, when Krishna incarnates Ram and Krishna, they are acting primarily in that field. And Krishna says a very interesting thing in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Evam param param prapto imam, what's the next word? Oh, how interesting. Who's he teaching the science to? The government people. He's teaching the science to the government people. Fascinating, isn't it? He doesn't say I'm teaching it to the scholars. He says I'm teaching it to the government people. Prabhupada said it's only people in that field of government who can establish varnashram. Like, I can't do it. I can talk about it, I can give the blueprint, but I can't do it. I need government people to do it. He says it's their job to make sure that everyone is employed and employed according to their nature. Says it all the time. And how are ideas people close to bhakti? They're guiding. Well, also a lot of their work may be studying scriptures, studying philosophy, teaching philosophy. So each of the four fields has a way that you're connected with Bhakti. Now, if we could see those sort of benefits, then I think we would have the determination to make the change, even though it's not going to be easy, especially in very well-established communities. Now, my guess is that a temple like this, probably, it might, I don't know if you have all four fields operating in the temple itself in terms of departments. So we'd have to look at establishing this in terms of the general community. Also, I feel it's very valuable if we can show that this can be established not just in a farm, but also in a city, because not everybody's going to move to a farm. Imagine if we could show this in Chicago. I hate to say this, but would Prabhupada be pleased? I know he would, because when he came to Chicago, he was talking to the police chief, right? He was talking about crime, why, and what to do. And Prabhupada was trying to get the existing government people to help establish this system in Chicago area. I know, I was here. So wouldn't that be wonderful? And maybe if we can envision that, we have a chapter in the third section of the book called Vision for a Whole Society. We have something amazing to offer the world. We have not only a transcendent philosophy of God playing his flute and herding cows and dancing with the gopis and playing balls with his friend, and which is amazing. And basically just enjoying all the time. We don't just have that philosophy. We have a socioeconomic system for how to run the world as a God-conscious society. But if we're not doing that with our own society, how are we going to talk about to the world? If someone looks at our own society and they say, well, you have people in all the wrong places, and you don't have people relating properly. Yeah, but you should do it. You know. Okay, let's look at this, how the fields should relate to each other. Now, this is something I don't generally teach. And I'm teaching it here specifically as related to Vaishnava etiquette, because how the fields relate to each other is very much part of Vaishnava etiquette. So for this, you want to look at that side of your handout. It's the table side that does not have the arrows on it. It looks like a table, but it doesn't have the arrows at the top. So the back side, find the one with the arrows and look at the back. So this particular page was developed working with Radhadesh in Belgium and New Govardhan in Australia. And both of those places have in their community areas of the community that are in all four fields. So what we looked at there was first of all, our first question was, ideally, what field should these various departments be in? For example, ideally, the boutique should be in what field? Resources. It should be making a profit. If you have a gift shop that's run by an artistry person, and I've seen some of these in our movement, they're not making any profit, but they may look like beautiful museums of Indian artifacts. Or they're run by an ideas person and all there are japa beads and some books, you know. Why do we need to sell gopi skirts? So first we talk about what ideally that department should be. Like I know of one place, I don't know if I mentioned this the other day, but I know of one place where they have a big agricultural area. Did I mention this? So they have a big agricultural area. They have a gauchal, they have a lot of land, and those should also be field of resources. But the person running it is a field of ideas person. And so the agricultural area he uses as a botanical laboratory. Not only does it not make money, and does it not feed the temple and the community, it costs the temple money. And he said, I don't know why people are complaining that the apples are rotting on the trees. He says, I'm studying the life cycle here and wanting them to rot on the trees. Now, sometimes it may not be clear. Like I know of one temple where they give tours of the temple. So what should that be in? If it's in ideas, it's going to be primarily a preaching program. If it's in resources, it's going to be primarily a profit-making program. If it's in artistry, it's going to be primarily just talking about the beauty of the temple and so forth. So because we tend to morph things to ourselves, whatever nature of person is doing that, they're going to change what's being done there. Everybody following? Yeah. So our first step was, okay, let's look at ideally, what should this department be? What field should this department be in? That was our first question. What are the different departments we have? What field should it be in? The next question we asked is, what's the temperament of the people running those things? And does it match? And then this was the tricky part, because you've got a person in the wrong place for 20 years. And they're like, are you going to throw me out? Am I going to lose my, status and financial security and things like that? But that would be then putting people in at least the heads of the departments in the right place. Then looking at the people who work in that department, are they in the right place? Now, again, we're not talking about people who come and do some service here and there. We're not talking about someone who dresses the deities once or twice a week, or someone who cooks an offering once a week, or someone who leads kirtan on Sunday. We're not talking about that. That we're doing it as a 64 angas of bhakti. Okay, we're not doing that as a livelihood. Clear? Clear? It's a very important distinction. Very important distinction. Like someone who's in artistry as a musician, that's how they make their money? Do they need to be paid for being a musician? Yes. Do we want them to sing songs about Krishna? Yes. So I had one sannyasi say to me, no, because no one's supposed to make money from kirtan. So I said, well, then how will they live, Maharaj? He said, well, Monday through Friday, they should sing mundane love songs and get paid for that. He actually said this to me. And then on the weekend, they can do kirtan for free. I said, how are you envisioning a Krishna conscious society, Maharaj? I said, if we made all of society Krishna conscious, is everyone just going to do garbage during the week? So, and if you have a priest who's doing mostly Sankirtan Yajna as a priest, is that also how they have to maintain themselves? Yes. Now, they should be able to maintain themselves with charity, but people should give them charity. The person in artistry could set a fee, say, this is how much I charge for a concert. The person in ideas can say, give some, but then you should give something. Do you follow? Whereas the person who's a banker and they come do kirtan as just their bhakti on the weekend, or is that their livelihood? No. Clear? So I'm not talking about what people are doing. Everyone should preach Krishna consciousness. Everybody can teach Shastra classes. That's different than a person who's a teacher as their livelihood. Okay? So we're looking at people. I'm super conscious of the time today. I cannot go over time today at all. That's not an option on the table. So we're looking at what people are doing for their livelihood. And then we're looking at how the fields interact. So that's what I'm just about to go through. So you want to have the proper understanding what that department should be as a field. Do we have a match in the temperament? And then how do the fields interact? Now, let's say you have a temple that's just a temple, that the only thing that the temple does is they have worship and education. And that's it. They don't do anything else. Then you'd be looking at instituting this in the greater community, helping devotees be in livelihoods that are according to their nature, and then seeing how the community of devotees could interact according to their fields. Now, people may object, well, if we don't put people just wherever they're needed, we won't get services covered. But then you're working on an emergency basis. You follow? You will burn out people. I know of one temple, I'm not going to say what it is. They're a burnout factory. They get people there and they just keep burning them out. So yeah, okay, you've got people to do the jobs, but hardly anybody wants to go there. Hardly anybody wants to work there. It gets harder and harder to find people to do things. But imagine if you come in, everybody's working according to their nature and the fields are interacting properly. What an atmosphere. you'd have people lining up to come and do service. So there'd be an initial switchover where you're going to be struggling and where you're going to have to change over gradually. But after a while, people would say, I want to go to that temple. I want to serve in that temple. Look at the way that people are interacting with each other. Look at the way that people are respecting each other's dharma. And everybody, we're actually living the Bhagavad Gita. We're actually living the Bhagavad Gita. I want to wait, and hopefully I'll get to it. Does that make sense? Yes, the transition will be difficult. And the transition has to be done by government temperament people. The people managing that transition have to be government temperament people. Because you need a lot of diplomacy. Ideas people are too straightforward, won't work. It won't work. Too straightforward, too abstract. They can give the guidance, they can give the template, but they can't be the doers of it. Clear? Like I think I said yesterday, Prabhupada was saying, we're trying to build a temple. We don't want just those people. They'll just go around chanting Hare Krishna. It won't be practical. We need people who can. Really funny quote. Okay, so let's look at how the field should interact. So this is mostly in part 3 of our book. This is principle 8. Cooperation between the fields, competition within the fields. So the fields are supposed to cooperate with each other. And again, if you look at that one handout with the table, you'll see how we're listing on cooperation. Do you see that? Do you see where it talks about cooperation? Everybody see that? If you hand it to me, just hand it. Yeah, so I'll give it right back. Okay, so you see that there's there's a row. You see there's a row on cooperation. There's a row on checks and balances. There's a row on competition. Does everybody see that? So that's what we're going to be looking at here. Thank you very much. Okay, so it's like a potluck. You know? Everybody brings to the feast their specialty. And you end up with a much better feast than if just 2 or 3 people cooked everything. And again, each is having a part in the universal body. Now, don't cooperate to corrupt the system. We're not supposed to cooperate to corrupt the system. We're not cooperating to cheat people. Right, like the tobacco industry. So they're gonna cooperate to cheat people and hurt people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about enjoying being a team member as part of a universal family for universal purposes. Again, like the parts of the body. How often does Srila Prabhupada talk about this? The different fields should cooperate like the different parts of the body. The different fields should never compete with each other. You don't want your liver competing with your stomach. You want your liver cooperating with your stomach. So ideas, they cooperate by training and guiding. And government cooperates by approving licensing and accreditation. Government may provide venues or facilitators to launch, repair, or maintain cooperative endeavors. Resources, they're going to organize, direct, and distribute the flow of money, materials, and energy that's drawn upon by the other members. And artistry has joint endeavors with all the other fields. So if you can look right now at the row of cooperation, and if anyone has any questions just about cooperation, if questions about other things, I don't know if I will have time to entertain it because I have a hard stop at 5. Any questions on cooperation? So you could read through that row. Yes. Considering that they might be. I'm confused about what you're asking. Will resources people in the Grihastha ashram give to ideas people in the Grihastha ashram? Is that your question? Well, we have, certainly in India, that culture is still there, though it's probably waning because of so much corruption. But it's, when Rampad Maharaj is talking about establishing a culture of respect, this is one of the things we're talking about. that, you know, some ideas work is obviously practical, like teaching children or healing diseases. But a lot of ideas work doesn't seem to be that practical to people. And so people have to be trained to support ideas people. Now, because ideas people are satisfied with their mental and intellectual stimulation, and they're very detached people, maintaining ideas people is not a very expensive proposition generally. I mean, it can be if they're doing in-depth scientific research or something like that. But yeah, that should be the training. Therefore, this needs to be trained, how to cooperate. Any other questions? Again, I want to limit the questions to cooperation. Well, what's on this paper, by the way, as I said, it comes from discussions with Radhadesh and New Govardhan. So that particular side of the paper, you notice we keeps talking about possible, possible, possible. We keep using the word possible. So this is a way of implementing it in a devotee community. It is not the way, and it is not the way for every community. This is a result of our ongoing work with these communities to implement this system. So there could be many other ways. That this is a draft, a work in progress kind of thing, but to give you some idea. Yes, Prabhu. Definitely. Definitely. Because there's a different standard of Dharma. And you want to understand that. And you want to celebrate that. And you want to cooperate with that. You don't want to try to impose your standard of Dharma on somebody else. That's not cooperation. Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Well, you'll notice that the way we're presenting this, we have zero hierarchy. Rukmini and I bent over backwards and twisted ourselves into knots to make sure that we don't have the slightest fragrance or idea of hierarchy. The problem with hierarchy is that, as Maharaj has been talking about, everybody wants to be at the top. And actually in Bhakti, the idea is to be at the bottom, to be the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. And it's a fact that there's hierarchy, but it's also a fact that there isn't hierarchy. Both are true. And we feel that the hierarchy has been emphasized to the point that it's become exploitive and it's become distorted. So that at this point, we really want to emphasize the equality of value. There is an equality of value. Do you want your lights to work? Do you want your plumbing to work? What is the point of a temple with wonderful Bhagavatam classes and the toilets are overflowing? I mean, seriously. And I have been in such places. I have. You know, what is the point? So like where I stay in North Carolina, for quite a while, I was the one managing the public bathrooms. Once I started traveling again, other people are doing it. But during COVID, I was doing it. And I said, this is part of the preaching. It was really interesting that one of the temple leaders was out buying flowers and came back. And I tried to talk to her. And she said, wait, I got to go use the bathroom. And she came out, she said, I didn't want to use any of those public bathrooms when I was out shopping. And then I thought, if our bathrooms aren't clean and well maintained, people are only going to stay at the temple until they have to use the bathroom, and then they're going to go home. I said, if we want people to stay for 6 or 8 hours and do service, we have to have clean, well maintained bathrooms. Yeah. And Prabhupada would talk about that. It's just as important. It's not less in importance. So, and Prabhupada said, you clean, if you, of course this floor is laminate, but he would say, if you're cleaning, which is good in this climate, you shouldn't have a marble floor in this climate. But he said, if you're cleaning the marble floor, you're cleaning the marble deity, it's equal. And Krishna sees it like that. That's how Krishna sees it. Krishna sees the florist in Mathura equally as to his friend Sudama Brahman. He gives the florist in Mathura, he says, you will be happy in this life and attain to the spiritual abode. Be one of my associates. Krishna doesn't see like that. So, sure, you could say the head is most important. Frankly, you could say the stomach is most important. And Prabhupada would often talk about how the stomach was most important, wouldn't he? Yes? Yes? Often. He would say all the senses should serve the stomach, just like everyone should serve God. Or he'd say, why are you talking about philosophy? What about Anya Bhavanti Bhutani? What about growing food? Am I right? Yeah. And if you don't have legs, I bring this up all the time, but you don't have legs. If you don't have legs, so you're either going to get a prosthesis, so you can walk, or you're going to get crutches, or you're going to get a wheelchair, or somebody else has to do stuff for you. So a hierarchy is a little dangerous. It's there, yes, it's there, but on the other hand, it's not there. So I would, my humble, I don't know if I can be humble or not, but my not so humble, whatever request is, at least for now, let's emphasize the equality. I mean, one of my greatest joys in teaching this is when people go, I'm in the field of artistry. Especially if they're Indian. You know, it's just, it brings me such happiness that people can love who they are and what they are, because that's what we are this life, you know? So many people right now in modern society are obsessed with changing their bodily identity. Yes? It's like whatever it is, it is. And Krishna says every endeavor has some fault, like smoke covers fire. There's problems in everything. But we need everybody in the society. So I'm just begging, please de-emphasize the hierarchy. It's there. It's there and it's true. But at this particular point, it's probably a better idea to go the other way. Otherwise, people artificially take some position that's not theirs. And people get hurt also. People get hurt. So someone will say, you know, this is my nature. Oh no, everybody has to do this. Now, just as an aside, I've been avoiding using the Sanskrit terms, but in our Shastric Advisory Council paper on the Brahma Gayatri Mantra, we talk about the fact that the word Brahmana is used in three ways. One is by birth. One is the way we're talking about here, by field of work, and the other is by knowing Brahman. So in terms of everyone can know God, in that sense, everyone is a Brahmana. And Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati they were trying to make an equivalence between Vaishnava and Brahmana, so that their disciples who are not born in Brahmana families or not even born in Indian families could do priestly activities, could be accepted as doing priestly activities. So that was their presentation. But yes, all of us should know Brahman. That doesn't mean, Prabhupada identified himself. How did Prabhupada identify himself in his Grihastha life? As a businessman. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a judge. Yeah. We don't say, oh, Prabhupada was lesser because he was running a pharmaceutical company. We don't say, oh, that was all just garbage. That it wasn't also service. So I want to. I should go on to checks and balances now. Again, I'm trying to be very conscious of the time. Sorry. I can't take everything. I just can't. As I said yesterday, this is a topic that we can go on and on and on and on and on. It's the only thing I've ever taught that's like that. And I'm sorry. My apologies. So looking at checks and balances. So it would be great if everybody worked in their right field and worked in their field rightly. But that isn't always going to happen. So the fields have to check and balance each other. So ideas is a check and balance because they hold government to the rule of law. Ideas speaks out against exploitation, oppression, and injustice. They bring to light dysfunction, corruption. What do we say? The pen is mightier than the sword. If we think about the function of a free press, they work on purity and unbiased integrity. How does government regulate? Well, government regulates through law. They balance the needs of those in various fields. They have regulations, conflict resolution, wealth redistribution, collecting taxes, returning the benefits, ensuring the happiness and well-being of all subjects by providing, as Prabhupada would say, for their material and spiritual needs. How does resources do check and balances? Well, through the flow of money, through money lending, through loans, through wealth circulation, financial planning to maintain economic stability. They regulate the other fields by where and how they spend their money. What do they give to? How does artistry regulate the fields? Well, first of all, through their numbers. They can engage in civil disobedience because it's the largest field. But also, very interesting, artistry can act as a check and balance through what they will translate into art and music. Remember, we had some court cases. One was with a cake baker and one was with a web designer. And they said, you can have such and such law on your books, but we're only going to translate into art things that are in accordance with our own beliefs. Do you guys remember that? And they won those cases? Huh? Yes, exactly. So the ideas, government, and resources people are dependent on people in the field of artistry to get their stuff out to the public. You follow? Government propaganda, it has to get out to the public through artistry. Concepts and ideas has to get out to the public through artistry. Advertising, marketing has to get out to the public through artistry. If people in artistry said, we don't agree with this. This is unethical. This is immoral. We're not going to make this advertisement. Then they act as a check and balance on the other fields. Okay. Any questions about checks and balances? Just checks and balances. If you could read that row, take a minute, please, and read that row on your paper about possible checks and balances in a devotee community. Yes. Therefore, people have to be trained in their dharma. Good point. People have to be trained in their dharma. This is the principle which we've talked about only briefly, cherishing the dharma of your field. Cherishing the dharma of your field. That if some people in the field break the dharma, it affects it corrupts the whole field. So doing ethical, meaningful work of value is not just your personal consideration. If you break your field's dharma, that the whole field becomes affected, like ripples in a water. And then the other fields are going to have to bring it back into line. Yes. And I'd like to hear from some people who haven't said anything. In every large group, you have certain people, and I'm one of them, who tend to speak a lot. And other people tend to only speak when we break up into smaller groups. But I would like to hear from some people who haven't said anything yet. And if there's, so please, if you're shy, okay, fine. But I'd like to, anyone else on checks and balances specifically? I already talked to somebody else. Yes? Well, therefore, people have to be trained to listen to ideas people. Because ideas people don't really have power. Of course, in former times, ideas people did have power. They could say, become a frog, and became a frog. And so people were a little scared of ideas people. I'm really serious. I mean, really, like, and you'd see it right in front of you. They do these Vedic yajnas, the old horse would go in the fire and they would chant these mantras and then the young horse would come out. And they would make fire just go, and there would be a fire, and people go, better listen to these guys. But society has to be trained, because otherwise everyone else will think it's all abstract pies in the skies and they won't pay any attention to it. So that has to be training, and the government needs to facilitate that. The government needs to make sure that the ideas people are protected. It's one of the categories of people that need to be protected by the government, and to make sure that they actually have their means of livelihood and that they have the facility to instruct the people. But if the government's corrupt, then you have a problem, because then the government will stop the ideas people. So you have a cascade of corruption that happened, say, in medieval Europe. That ideas were corrupted, and then government was corrupted, and then resources corrupted, and then artistry was corrupt. Okay, I want to go on to competition. So Srila Prabhupada encouraged competition. He said competition gives life. We were doing a lot. When Prabhupada was here, we did a lot of competition in book distribution, especially. I mean, you might say, well, we should each try to do our best for its own sake. In theory, that works. But in practice, when there's an opponent, it encourages you to do your best, doesn't it? Focuses your mind and invigorates your efforts. When we see others do great things, it reminds us of our own potential, pushes the edges of our ability. There's competition in the spiritual world, you know. Cowherd boys are competing, the gopis are competing. Now, it should be friendly competition, like the jewelry district or the fashion district, which benefits both the business and the customers. We don't want predatory competition. We're not trying to erase the competition. I like to give the example of those tennis stars sisters with Serena and Venus Williams. So they're sisters, but they're competing. But they also love each other as sisters. They want to win, right? They want to win. It's not that they don't want to win. But if their sister wins, they're also happy. As we're competing for book distribution, we're not angry if the temples distribute more books than we do. We're trying to beat them, but if they beat us, we're also happy. Does that make sense to everybody? And competition can only be within the fields. So competition within the field of artistry, it leads to inventions, it leads to masterpieces, classic pieces of art, architecture, music, higher quality of trade and craft. Right? You think about fairs, like each state in America has county fairs and state fairs, and a lot of that is competition in artistry. Who can do the best quilt, who can bake the best cake, right? And one of the things we're talking about in these communities that want to institute this is, what if we have an annual arts fair of competition? Prabhupada really liked the idea of cottage industries, you know, weaving our own cloth, that's all artistry stuff, making our own soap, right? Making deity jewelry. And you can have people who are doing these different crafts and they come and compete and they get prizes. Competition in resources. So this is what's enabled the world's population to come to 8 billion people. Competition in the quality of resources, competition in the distribution of resources. Competition in different businesses has allowed great advances in information. There can be competition between businesses for quality, for price, for environmental impact, for customer service, for employee treatment, and for charitable giving. Who can give the most impactful charity? Who can treat their employees the best? Okay, competition in government. That's what's enabled us in many parts of the world to live most of the time peacefully, safe from criminals and aggressors and war. I mean, we don't worry in America about we don't worry much about somebody bombing us, right? Except when I was in Hawaii in 2018. So I was in Hawaii. I was there with my oldest grandson. Do any of you remember that, or any of you hear about that? You know how the phone will ring when there's like an Amber Alert or something? Everybody's phone starts ringing, even if it's on silent. So our phone started going beep, 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 beep. Warning, incoming ballistic missiles. This is not a test. This is not a drill. Warning, warning, incoming ballistic missiles. Take shelter immediately. Somebody pushed the wrong button. And this was during Trump's first term, and there was a lot going on with North Korea. And I looked at my grandson and I said, maybe we're going to be bombed by North Korea. And I said, well, we're on the Big Island. They'll probably bomb Honolulu, and then we're going to have to worry about the fallout. We don't have any place to go. We were having a morning program. We were just finishing our morning program at the time. I said, I guess we should just keep reading the Bhagavatam. But generally in this country, and 45 minutes later, they told us it was a mistake. 45 minutes later. And I said, North Korea to here, interballistic missile will probably take only 15 minutes. Hare Krishna. But generally, we don't worry about that kind of thing. And we think about the variety of public services that are offered in different cities, different counties, different states, different countries, right? Countries are competing. Who's going to take better care of their citizens? And we have different governments. We have different forms of government in different states. In India also, there's different forms of governments. People can compete. What kind of government do they like? Governments can compete. Who can take better care of the citizens? Who can have better overall prosperity? Who has more freedom from crime? Who has more freedom from corruption? Who has more rights for citizens? Competition within the field of ideas. This leads to sound and coherent philosophies, theories, worldview, and religions that are available to guide us through life. Scientists competing to aid in knowledge. Competition among religious and traditional groups increases purity and relevance to time, place, and circumstance. I know often in ISKCON we don't like the idea that there are competitive Gaudiya Vaishnava groups, but overall it's been very good for the health of our ISKCON society. Just by the way. One of the healthiest communities I was in was when I was in a community that had 2 competing temples and 2 competing schools. And when it started, people were like, hey, we can't do that. No, that's terrible. We should all just do the same thing. But people were happier, and there was less complaining, and there was less politics, and there was less infighting. It was amazing. If you weren't happy at one temple, you just went to the other one. I was running one of the schools. If you didn't like our school, instead of complaining all the time, you just put your kids in the other school. And everybody was going, our school, our school. Nobody was complaining. They were just like, we have the best temple. We had the best. And some of the perpetual complainers, they just moved back and forth all the time. And we had this thing in our school that if you took your kids out and put them back in, you had to pay a re-enrollment fee of $100 per kid. So we didn't care, Take your kids out, put them in the other school for 2 months, put them back in, pay another $300 to enroll your kids back. It's fine. But it was really interesting to me how then people just started focusing on what was good about what was going on in their particular organization, and the criticism in politics just like evaporated. And the community population, the devotee community population, quadrupled. It quadrupled. Wow, I want to go to some place where I have some choice and I have some options. It's fascinating. Right? How do you have competition ideas? Through debates, publications, scientific awards, research, testing, and so forth. Okay, if you could look at these, I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint right now. Or actually, I know what I'm going to do. So if you could look at your row about competition on your paper, and if anybody has any questions about competition. Yes.
That are competitions in government. Yes, it can be also
anything can become corrupt, and this is a material world, and we're in Kali Yuga, so things become corrupt. You have to keep restoring the purity over and over and over again. Like, you can't just take one shower a year, You know what I'm saying? I mean, you have to keep doing it. You can't just say, well, I've cleaned my room, that's it, There has to be an ongoing process of maintaining purity and fighting against corruption. And this has to be done within each field and through the cooperation, competition, and checks and balances. If that's done properly, it helps maintain the purity. You have competition between governments. People are going to want to leave a place where there's a corrupt government and come to a place where there isn't. Right? It's going to put pressure to people to come to a certain standard. That's why I say competition is healthy. If it's done properly, if you don't demonize your competition. But anything can become corrupt. It has to keep, and ultimately, like the other principles, getting above the shades of ego. You have to help people to get above the gunas. You have to help human society in general to come to transcendence. And our principle having celebrations of the sacred in our life and work, that everybody should engage in some kind of yajna. You want to uplift everybody. So this having celebrations of the sacred, this is about yajna, it's about sadhana. Someone asked me the other day, he said, so I'm teaching, and I'm teaching music in schools, and I'm teaching Sankirtan, but I can't just do our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sankirtan, I also have to do like for other religious traditions. And how can I be more direct in Krishna consciousness? I said, well, that sounds pretty direct to me. I said, Prabhupada would always say, you can chant the name of God in your tradition. We don't have any objection to that. Actually, Ramapad Maharaj was talking about Brahmananda and Gargamuni's mother, and she was complaining to Prabhupada about what did Prabhupada have against Judaism. And I was thinking, when my father first met Prabhupada in Chicago, the summer of 1974, and he said, I'm not coming to the temple to see Krishna, I have my own religion. He said, I'm Jewish, I have my own religion. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's fine. He said, just like we're in Chicago, and he said, there's many planes going to Chicago. As long as they know they're going to Chicago, there can be many planes. He said, but you have to know you're going to Chicago, or what's the meaning? He said, so in your religion, if you're learning to know and love God, then it's a bona fide religion. So one way we're going to have the purity is engage everyone in the Sankirtan Yajna. We're going to help everybody to surpass the modes of nature. We're pretty good at that aspect. We're pretty good at trying to engage everyone in Sankirtan and trying to get everybody to engage in Yajna and helping people to surpass the modes of nature. And wouldn't it be good if we were good at the other stuff too? If we got the whole picture. So ultimately, the only way you're going to get rid of corruption is by elevating people spiritually. And that's an essential piece. But it's going to be hard to elevate people spiritually if you don't have them rightly situated materially. Make sense? It would be very difficult to have this class out on the street. We could do it, but it would be difficult. Therefore, you took so much money and so much trouble to build this building, to provide the physical facility. Yes? So the system is like that. So thank you very much. So our class for the Sunday feast is going to be on Lord Shiva. So if you're interested, if you want to explore this topic more, I suggest you go to careerdharma.net. So at careerdharma.net, we have there, you can sign up for our mailing list. We also have an online course. It also tells you where you can contact coaches if you want some individual coaching. We might have some more copies of our Career Dharma book here, and I can even sign it for you. And I've also been asked to talk about some of our other books here. We have also Krishna Meditations, How to Find Krishna Everywhere in the World. We have the Great Mantra book, How to Purify Your Chanting and Chant Without Offense. We have Essence Seekers, which is a devotional novel, How to Attain Krishna Prema in the form of a novel, something really nice for both adults and teenagers. We have our Bhagavad Gita book, which is a whole basic elementary study guide for Bhagavad Gita that we wrote for children, but also many adults like it. So again, anything good in this presentation is due to the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, our acharyas, the Shastras, and my wonderful co-author, Dr. Ruchira Datta, Rukmini Devi Dasi. Anything wrong in this presentation is entirely my responsibility. Don't even blame Rukmini. So please take the good and put aside the bad. Thank you. Hare Krishna.